Right, so most politicians guilty of wrongdoing spend years trying to dodge prosecutors. However, Israel's far-right ministers Itamar, Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich appear determined to gift-wrap the evidence for them. In the very week the International Criminal Court was revealed to have drafted apartheid charges against both of them, Ben-Gvir swaggered into a prison cell to bully the most famous Palestinian prisoner alive, while Smotrich boasted that he would bury the West Bank before the world could recognise a Palestinian state. For men already staring down allegations of crimes against humanity, it was the diplomatic equivalent of turning up to court with blood literally still dripping from their hands. What they thought was defiance looked to much of the world instead like a confession. With those reports confirmed that the International Criminal Court had indeed prepared arrest warrants for Ben-Gvir and Smotrich on the charge of apartheid, the first time in history such a prosecution has not only been contemplated for Israeli leaders, but to anyone ever, that alone would have been extraordinary enough. But when the two ministers then acted out their own arrogance on the world's stage, they may have handed prosecutors precisely what they needed: clear, attributable proof of intent to dominate. The question is no longer simply whether Israel can be accused of apartheid. It is whether its own ministers have just demonstrated it beyond all denial. Right, so the ICC's drafting of arrest warrants, combined with the self-incriminating behaviour of these two ministers, has profoundly altered the debate about Israel and apartheid. It's no longer merely a question of whether international NGOs or Palestinian activists can convince the world that Israel is an apartheid state. The ministers themselves have effectively supplied the evidence for that now. More of it in just the last few days, in fact, providing clear proof of intent, which is always the hardest element to demonstrate in international criminal law. Their words and actions not only strengthen the legal case against them, but also undermines the legitimacy of Netanyahu's government, which cannot function without their support. So let's take a look at this legal definition of apartheid then, the reason why Ben-Gvir and Smotrich have been singled out, the significance of their recent statements in light of that, and the consequences for Israel's already pretty low international standing, and the broader diplomatic and political ramifications, because we could be looking here at how August of 2025 marks the turning point akin to South Africa's isolation back in the 1980s. The starting point has got to be the legal foundation, though. Apartheid is not merely a term of political invective. It is codified as a crime against humanity in and of itself. And in Article 7.1j of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, there it is defined as inhumane acts committed in the context of an institutionalized regime of systematic oppression and domination by one racial group over any other racial group or groups, and committed with the intention of maintaining that regime. Unlike war crimes, which address discrete actions such as attacks on civilians or the misuse of prohibited weapons, apartheid addresses the structure of a system itself. It's about deliberate and permanent subordination. Historically, the term is obviously most associated with South Africa's white minority government, which from 1948 until the early 1990s operated a regime of explicit racial segregation and domination. The world eventually turned against that system and imposed sanctions and boycotts and diplomatic isolation until it collapsed. Since then, however, the legal category of apartheid has remained underused. Although rights organisations such as Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch and Bezalel have in recent years described Israel's occupation as a form of apartheid, alternative news sites and mouthpieces like me regularly do so as well. But international institutions have largely hesitated to adopt the same framing. The ICC's decision to draft charges against Israeli ministers, therefore, for the crime of apartheid, represents an extraordinary shift. It signals that the court is prepared to treat Israel's regime in the occupied territories as directly comparable to apartheid South Africa now, not just in rhetoric, but in law. So the implications of that are profound. If apartheid charges are formally issued, Israel will join a very short list of states or regimes ever to face such classification. Already the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation condemned Israel's latest settlement plans as a calculated move to entrench apartheid, while the United Nations described the expansion as a potential war crime, more hand-wringing and doing nothing as per usual there. International coverage by Al Jazeera, though, for example, has highlighted how governments worldwide reacted with anger to Smotrich's plan to bury the West Bank. The world's no longer debating whether apartheid is an appropriate descriptor. It's beginning to treat it as a legal fact. The ICC has not targeted Netanyahu for this charge, notably, at least not yet, though of course he already has an arrest warrant out against him already. Instead, it's singled out two ministers whose roles and rhetoric make them the clearest embodiment of apartheid in practice. Bezalel Smotrich, though formerly the finance minister, was in 2023 granted authority over the civil administration in the West Bank. This arrangement effectively made him the civilian governor of the occupied territory, controlling planning, construction, demolitions, and settlement policy, the absolute worst person that could possibly be put in that position. His hand can be seen in the expansion of every settlement that international law already regards as illegal. When he declared that the West Bank must be buried before Palestinian statehood is recognised, he was speaking not as a fringe politician, but as the man with direct administrative control over Palestinian land. His previous statement in 2023 that the Palestinian village of Hawara should be wiped out remains infamous in both tone and substance. Smotrich's words are admissions that his policies are designed to permanently exclude Palestinians from sovereignty. Itamar Ben-Gvir's role is different but equally central. As National Security Minister, he oversees Israel's police, border police, and prisons. These institutions are the enforcement arm of apartheid. They man the checkpoints, suppress the demonstrations, carry out the mass arrests. They run the prisons where thousands of Palestinians are held without charge, hostages, as that would make them therefore. Ben-Gvir has a long history of incitement, having once been convicted in Israel already for racist agitation, but as a minister, his rhetoric carries state authority. His filmed confrontation with Marwan Barghouti this week was therefore more than a provocation. It was an act of intimidation by the man responsible for prison oversight. Telling Barghouti, "We will wipe them out," is an explicit statement of intent to dominate. The ICC's choice to focus on these two men is thus both strategic and evidentiary. Prosecutors often prefer to start with the clearest cases of individual liability, especially where the suspect's own words demonstrate intent, because that can set a precedent, making it easy to follow suit against others. Netanyahu's culpability may be a little too diffuse in this instance, spread across military and diplomatic decisions. Again, with one arrest warrant out for him already, though, does two really make much of a difference? There's another argument that could be had in this context. But Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, they've provided textbook examples, and they've both done it again just this week. They control the machinery of apartheid and declare their intentions openly. One of the most difficult challenges in international criminal law is always proving intent. It's not enough to show that discriminatory policies exist. Prosecutors must demonstrate that they are designed to entrench domination, and often this requires painstaking work, taking weeks, months, years even, piecing together documents, orders, and patterns of conduct. In the last week, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich made the prosecutor's task so much easier by simply declaring it themselves. Ben-Gvir's prison video, broadcast on his own social media, showed him entering Ganot prison and addressing Marwan Barghouti, who is widely regarded as a leading Palestinian political figure and leader. In just 13 seconds, Ben-Gvir taunted him, told him Palestinians would not win, and vowed to wipe out those who opposed Israel. The United Nations called the footage disturbing. Well, just keep wringing your hands, guys. While Palestinian officials branded it state terrorism, which surely it was. The symbolism was unmistakable. A senior minister was using his office to personally intimidate a political prisoner, looking gaunt and mistreated to boot, demonstrating the regime's determination to dominate. For prosecutors, that is not just rhetoric, it is direct evidence of intent to suppress a protected group. Smotrich's declaration about burying the West Bank is equally incriminating. Settlement policy has long been justified by Israeli officials as a matter of security or natural growth. But Smotrich admitted that its real purpose is to prevent the recognition of a Palestinian state now. This admission aligns perfectly with the legal definition of apartheid, which requires proof that domination is deliberate. So international reactions have been swift. The OIC condemned the statement. The United Nations reiterated that settlement expansion is a war crime. Governments across the world expressed outrage. Do something instead, the lot of you. But by confessing the purpose of settlement expansion, Smotrich turned what could have been argued as contested policy into explicit evidence of apartheid intent. Together, these two events provided what prosecutors crave: admissions from senior officials that their system is designed to dominate permanently. They did not need to incriminate themselves, but they did so anyway. For Ben-Gvir and Smotrich personally, the consequences may end up being severe. If the ICC proceeds to issue these warrants against them now, they will be unable to travel safely to any of the 124 states that are parties to the Rome Statute. Many of these include Israel's most important allies in Europe. Already both men have been sanctioned by the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Norway, Slovenia and the Netherlands. Arrest warrants would intensify their pariah status. I dare say states may be more tempted to act on these warrants against these two, where perhaps they've chosen not to against Netanyahu. Not that that is right or just or correct, but still making them symbols of apartheid in the international imagination. Domestically, they may attempt to turn this into some political capital for themselves, portraying themselves as martyrs of nationalist resistance against foreign interference. They are adept at mobilizing their far-right base through defiance. They are representatives of the very worst ideological elements of Israeli society. Their base is amongst the settler movement, of course. But internationally, their reputations will be toxic, even more than they already are. They will be treated in the same category as leaders indicted for crimes against humanity elsewhere, such as Sudan's Omar al-Bashir or Russia's Vladimir Putin, and indeed, just like their boss Netanyahu. The implications for Israel are broader still, though. The drafting of apartheid's charges effectively settles the debate over whether Israel can be described as an apartheid state. Even going through the motions, as the ICC had been doing, has already done that, I think. Once the ICC formally frames charges in those terms, the matter ceases utterly to be rhetorical, doesn't it? It becomes a legal fact, contested only in court. This undermines decades of Israeli diplomacy that has insisted on its democratic credentials. This is why, with Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan having excused himself as a result of charges levied against him on other matters, all of course having come in the wake of that arrest warrant for Netanyahu himself, his deputies must rule on this one, and they are being leaned on heavily and threatened with sanctions just like Khan was. They need to resist it, or the ICC's remit will have been rendered toothless. Diplomatically, the backlash is already evident enough, though. International condemnation of settlement expansion was unusually unified, with the OIC, the United Nations, and a whole host of European states all criticising Israel's plans here. Unusually unified. All criticising Israel's plans, the world decrying Smotrich's vow to bury the West Bank. For those governments looking to recognise a Palestinian state next month, Smotrich's words confirm what Palestinians have long been claiming, that Israel's settlement project is designed to eliminate their right to statehood. Netanyahu himself is caught in a political trap. His coalition depends on Smotrich's religious Zionism party and Ben-Gvir's Jewish power faction, Otzma Yehudit. If he were to dismiss them, his government, already a minority administration now after the departures of Torah Judaism and Shas, would collapse. But by keeping them, he ties himself to their admissions of apartheid intent as well. Either way, he cannot escape liability here. As Prime Minister, he presides over the system they administer. If they are guilty of apartheid, so is he by default. The ICC's willingness to pursue apartheid charges against Israeli ministers has significance far beyond the Middle East. The court has often been accused of focusing disproportionately on African leaders while avoiding cases involving powerful states or their allies. By drafting charges against Israeli ministers, the ICC is challenging that perception. It asserts that no state is above the law, not even one backed by the United States. For Israel, the diplomatic consequences may be dire. Apartheid South Africa eventually faced boycotts, sanctions and sporting bans that isolated it internationally. The BDS movement, already active, will gain new momentum from the ICC's framing. Its advocates can now argue that boycotts are not just political, but a moral necessity to oppose crimes against humanity. Symbolically, Israel's leaders have destroyed their own narrative. By their own words and deeds, they've confirmed what Palestinians, rights groups and now international prosecutors insist, that Israel operates an apartheid regime. This language, once confined to activists, is now moving into the mainstream of law and diplomacy. So the events of this month may come to be remembered yet as the moment Israel's apartheid system stopped being a contested allegation and began looking like a self-confessed crime. The ICC had already been assembling evidence against Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, but their own arrogance supplied prosecutors with something even rarer: admissions of intent now, filmed and declared in their own words. Equally, it makes it that much harder for those deputy prosecutors to back off under pressure as well, and will look even worse if they do in fact end up capitulating. Instead of projecting strength, they revealed weakness. What was meant as humiliation for Palestinians has become humiliation for Israel on the world stage. By flaunting their domination and their arrogance, they turn themselves into the star witnesses of their own prosecutions. Netanyahu, bound to them by his fragile coalition, now finds himself trapped between collapse at home and condemnation abroad. Even more of it. Don't you just love to see it? If South Africa's apartheid regime collapsed once the world united against it, Israel's leaders may have just accelerated their own implosion. What remains is not whether the world believes Israel is an apartheid state. it is how long Netanyahu's government can survive now that his own ministers, through their own arrogant stupidity, have proven it for him. Already, Israel is finding out it's not welcome in certain places, though, and Belgium have just given a masterclass in how to make that point. Not that their government has done that, I might add, but ordinary working-class people downing tools and refusing to service them, as Israel's main airline El Al is now finding out to its cost. Get all the details of that Israeli headache in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, of course, so as to ensure that you don't miss out on all new daily content, sort of spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.